Most people don't question the world they wake up in, but not you. You saw something, felt something, a glitch, a gap, a whisper. Welcome to Quantum Cracks. Tonight, we open the file on the phantom time hypothesis.
You were looking at an old stone cross that was erected to commemorate the death of a holy man named Saint Othmar. But there's something strange about it. You see, according to the inscription carved into the stone, this man died in the year 853 AD. But according to some historians, Saint Othmar never lived, and the year 853 AD didn't exist either. That might sound like an insane claim, but hear me out. Because we're going to go down the rabbit hole of one of the most controversial theories in all of history. The idea that over 300 years of history are missing from our current understanding of the past. This is the so-called phantom time hypothesis. And it was first proposed by a German historian named Herbert Illig back in 1991 in his book, Die Echtzeit der Franken, which translates into the real time of the Franks. Illig argued that somewhere between the year 614 and 911 AD, the entire course of European history went off the rails. And the result was that our calendar is either missing or misplaces roughly 297 years of our shared past. According to Illig, the vast majority of people who lived during this supposed gap in our history never existed. Or if they did, almost everything we know about them is false. This includes famous and infamous figures from medieval lore, such as the Frankish King Clovis, who is traditionally credited with conquering much of Western Europe and laying the foundation for modern France. Or how about the legendary warrior Queen Brunhild, who features prominently in the folklore of Northern Europe and even inspired a famous opera by Hector Berlioz. Under Illig's thesis, these people would have to be written out of history entirely, or have their accomplishments drastically reduced. But perhaps no one would be hit harder than the famed Frankish emperor Charlemagne, who has been called one of Europe's greatest medieval rulers and whose supposed deeds were responsible for launching the continent into the so-called Carolingian Renaissance, a period of cultural renewal during the 8th and 9th centuries. According to Illig, either Charlemagne never existed, or he was merely a minor noble. And yet, despite all of this supposedly being made up, somehow the myth of Charlemagne survived into the modern day. So what exactly is going on here? Well, the answer takes us to the very core of how we understand history. According to Illig, in the year 800, a small group of elites conspired to manufacture a new past. Their goal was to invent a new culture hero in order to legitimize their rule over a decentralized collection of Germanic tribes. So they created the myth of Charlemagne. Similarly, Illig argued that a few decades later, when Otto the Great became the first Holy Roman Emperor in 962, he moved the symbolic starting point of his reign back another 200 years to 768. Why 768? Because it placed his reign squarely between the supposed reigns of Rome's last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, who was deposed in 476, and the Islamic conquest of the city of Jerusalem in 638. This gave Otto's empire a nice bookend, making it seem as though the Holy Roman Empire represented the continuation of classical Roman rule in the West. The thing is, there's actually very little evidence that any of this really happened. And Illig believes that instead of taking place over several centuries, the supposed Carolingian Renaissance only took place over a single generation. But in order for this propaganda campaign to work, someone needed to erase the memories of what came before. But why would anyone want to do that? Well, according to Illig, whoever was pulling the strings wanted to hide the fact that they descended from a long line of local chieftains. Instead, they decided to reinvent themselves as the true heirs of ancient Rome. But who was behind this plot? Well, according to Illig, that's the real mystery. It could have been a forgery concocted by the Pope and the Frankish nobility to help them seize more power in the wake of the fall of Rome. Or perhaps it was a way for the Church to downplay the role of paganism in the development of European culture. Or maybe it was just plain old-fashioned propaganda to help legitimize the ruling elite. As you might imagine, many historians disagree with this assessment, pointing out that there is simply too much evidence confirming the existence of Charlemagne and other leaders from this period. For example, while many of the buildings built by Charlemagne's successors were destroyed over the next 1,000 years, enough of his palaces still stand that archaeologists can study them today. In addition, tree ring dating has helped confirm the dates of many of the buildings constructed during his reign. The wood used to build these structures only grew during certain years, and scientists have been able to use that to confirm the chronology of construction. In addition, there are contemporary accounts of Charlemagne's life and deeds as well as the surviving records of his court. And speaking of records, we should probably talk about the Bible, one of the key pieces of evidence against. Illig's theory is that there are multiple references to events that allegedly took place during this supposed phantom time period, such as the founding of the monastery at Bobbio by Saint Columban in 614. Some scholars believe that these references are nothing more than anachronisms, meaning the writers of the Bible mistakenly wrote down things that didn't happen, when they thought they were writing about the past. But others believe that these biblical accounts were deliberately altered at some point to fit the official narrative. Regardless, most historians agree that it's highly unlikely that a conspiracy of this magnitude could have been carried out and then kept secret for so many centuries. In addition, it's worth noting that Illig's theory implies that not only did all of these people not live, but all of the archaeological evidence, historical documents, and works of art depicting them are also fake. Needless to say, few mainstream historians take this claim seriously. However, those who support Illig's theory point out that there are a lot of weird anomalies that need explaining. For example, there are barely any archaeological remains from the supposed era of the Carolingian Renaissance. Considering how long this period lasted, we would expect to find tons of artifacts from this time, but we haven't. Supporters of the phantom time hypothesis also point out that during this supposed gap in our history, there are also weird discrepancies in recorded astronomical events. For example, one of the most reliable chronologies we have for this period is based on the eclipses of the moon, but there are some unexplained gaps. There are also some entries for solar eclipses that can't be accounted for by modern science. Some have suggested that these records may refer to supernova, but since no archaeological evidence for them exists, that explanation hasn't gained much traction among astronomers. This isn't the first time a similar theory has been put forward. In the late 19th century, a British historian named James Freeman Clarke argued that the entire Anglo-Saxon period of British history was made up. This was based on his belief that the language spoken by England's supposed Anglo-Saxon invaders was nearly sophisticated enough to have produced the literature we associate with this period. However, modern scholarship has shown that the Anglo-Saxons were likely literate, and that their language evolved rapidly after their arrival in Britain. In addition, the traditional dates for the Anglo-Saxon period are now confirmed by archaeology, which shows that the Anglo-Saxons arrived in Britain sometime around the middle of the 5th century. So what is the truth? Did hundreds of years just disappear from our collective memory? Are our calendars wrong? Did Charlemagne really not exist? Well, at least one journalist thinks so. A reporter for the German newspaper Die Welt spent over a decade combing through the evidence, interviewing dozens of historians and experts from various fields. And in 2007, he published his findings in a book entitled Charlemagne's Urban, which translates to the heirs of Charlemagne. In it, he argues that Illig's basic premise may be correct, but that there is no evidence to support the idea that Charlemagne was anything other than a minor noble. According to his research, the Frankish rulers tried to rewrite their own history in order to paint themselves as the rightful heirs of Rome. They selectively copied documents, forged new ones, and even tampered with the Bible in order to support their claims. However, he notes that there's no evidence that the population at large participated in this charade, pointing to a number of folk tales and songs that clearly describe a different history than the one put forward by the elites. Now, while this may not be the definitive word on the matter, the fact that a major newspaper would publish a book like this goes to show that there may be more to this theory than meets the eye. Now, whether you believe in the phantom time hypothesis or not, one thing is for sure: history is full of surprises, and there's always more to discover about our past. What do you think? Comment below. Thanks so much for watching, and subscribe for more content. We'll see you next time.